You are reading file number 9. You call it Stockholm Syndrome. The record says that name isn't even real. The file is now open. 10 minutes ago, it was 3 words and a heart. Now it's nothing, and you keep checking, like the answer might change if you look again. Stockholm Syndrome got its name in 1973 after a bank robbery in Sweden. Psychiatry never adopted it. It isn't in the manual clinicians actually use. What is in the research, dating back to 1981, has a duller name and a much better paper trail: traumatic bonding. 3 moments in this file show exactly how that bond gets built: in a courtroom, in a laboratory, and in a prison cell, 1,500 years before either one existed. None of them start with love or weakness. They start with a pattern so specific, researchers can build it on purpose, in a room, in about 6 weeks.
2 conditions build a bond like this. Researchers named them in 1981, studying women in violent relationships. First, someone above you, holding something you need. Second, the part people miss: they don't hurt you on a schedule. That first condition does more work than it sounds like. It isn't 2 equals in a rough patch. It's a real gap: money, status, the only version of a home you've got left, something you'd lose by leaving that isn't just the person. Now picture the second condition. Most nights, distant. Some, worse. Then, no warning, one perfect evening, the version of them you fell for, back for a few hours. That version isn't rare because it's fake. It's rare because rare is what makes it work. There's a name for a reward with no fixed schedule: variable ratio reinforcement, the design behind a slot machine. Psychologists have known since the 1950s it's the hardest reward pattern to walk away from. Harder than a reward that never comes, harder than one that always does. It isn't only relationships. A manager who's sharp with everyone most days, then once a month singles you out for real praise. You stay 18 months past when you should have quit, chasing a version of the job that shows up 4 times a year. It's the same design behind the phone you keep checking. The reply doesn't come every time you want it to. That's not a flaw in the connection. Unpredictability is the feature. The file just never told you that. Researchers call what follows a cycle, not a mood. Tension, then a rupture, then real repair. An apology that sounds sincere, because in that moment it is. Calm. And that calm gets mistaken for the relationship healing instead of what it actually is: the reload. Most people who live inside that cycle stay quiet about it. One woman didn't. She said it out loud, under oath, in a federal courtroom.
2017. A self-help company called NXIVM, built by a man named Keith Raniere, ran a secret women's group inside it, sold to new members as a sisterhood. Sarah Edmondson, an actor and one of its senior members, was invited in. Entry required what the group called collateral, compromising material held as leverage against her. Then came a branding ceremony, restrained, told what to say, and burned with a symbol she wasn't told, until afterward, spelled Raniere's own initials. Edmondson has since described what kept her inside for months after that: praise from Raniere that felt like being truly seen, followed by punishment and status stripped away on no schedule she could predict. She would later name what that did to her: a trauma bond. In 2019, Raniere was convicted on federal racketeering and sex trafficking charges. Edmondson.
Here's the detail the record makes plain. The collateral wasn't a side threat. It was collected first, before the sisterhood offered anything back. Reward and threat from the same hands, close enough together that the mind stops telling them apart. That's not a cult problem. That's the mechanism, running at full strength, with the lights on, in a room full of grown women who'd read every self-help book there was.
That's what it looked like in a courtroom.
What it looks like in a laboratory is stranger, and it explains why your own brain is in on it too. Join the registry before we open it.
Here's the part neuroscience adds, and it isn't comfortable. In the 1990s, researchers led by Wolfram Schultz recorded individual brain cells reacting to reward in real time as it arrived. A reward you expect barely registers. It's already priced in. But a reward you didn't see coming makes the same cells fire far harder. Not because the reward is bigger, because it was unpredictable. That's not a metaphor borrowed from gambling anymore. It's the same circuit. The good version of them, arriving on no schedule, isn't just emotionally rare. Biologically, it's built to hit harder than the same good version arriving every day would. The pattern reloads itself. Reaching for reassurance can exhaust the very person who might otherwise give it, which confirms the fear that started the reaching and resets the cycle for the next room you walk into. None of this makes the pattern permanent. What breaks it is almost always the same thing, a source of safety steady enough, long enough, that the nervous system stops waiting for the drop. That takes longer than most people expect. Schultz recorded this in a lab, on a screen, in the 1990s. Someone had already described the exact same trap without a single instrument, 1,500 years earlier, waiting to be executed.
The year is 523. The philosopher Boethius sits in a cell, condemned, waiting to die on a charge historians still argue was invented. To pass what's left of his time, he writes a dialogue and gives the best lines to a character named Fortune. Fortune speaks for herself in the text, unapologetic. She raises people up, she puts them down. She has never once promised otherwise. This is my art. This the game I never cease to play. I turn the wheel that spins. I delight to see the high come down and the low ascend. Boethius isn't describing bad luck. He's describing a bond. The fact that people keep climbing back onto a wheel that has never once stopped turning on them, because the turning itself is what keeps them reaching for the top. 1,500 years before a courtroom, before a laboratory, someone already had this filed. He just didn't have a name for the wheel. Now we do.
So here's the reframe. If you've stayed somewhere long past the point it made sense, that was never proof you're weak or that you don't love yourself enough. It's proof your nervous system did exactly what unpredictable reward is built to do to any nervous system. And the file has a real limit. This explains the bond. It doesn't explain the whole cage. Researchers warn this term can end up blaming the person who stayed, when the harder truth is usually money, safety, or a door that was never really open. So don't diagnose your relationship with a phrase from a video. Do something smaller. Next time relief hits you harder than the moment deserves, ask what came right before it, the calm or the version of them that showed up to earn it back. That question alone won't undo a pattern your brain has been rewarded for running for years, but it puts a name on the wheel while it's still turning, instead of only after you've climbed off it. The wheel doesn't stop because you noticed it. It stops because you stopped reaching for the top of it.
You understand why you stayed now. There's a related file already open on this desk, and it asks a colder question. Why some people stop trying to leave, even after the door is standing open. That is file number 10, already on the desk. For the record, when did you last mistake relief for love? Testimony goes in the comments. This case is closed, but the archive never is.